So most of my life story takes place in New Jersey. The exception being there was a short time when I moved to California, and you'll hear about that later on. Most of the memories I have of my earliest life were from around ages 11 plus. I don't remember much prior to that, so I'm not going to discuss that period. But the time that I do remember is actually the time of most importance anyway, because that's the time that I really started having difficulty in life. So around 11, 12 years old, some changes happened in life. I think I started a new school, and there was some new people around me, and it was the first time in my life that I started having problems with other people. There were some people that basically just liked to fight, people that were bullies, and for whatever reason, I had some face-to-face confrontations, and I realized then that I handled those a little differently than other people. I didn't back down. I wasn't afraid. I just exploded violently and basically took it to an extreme from a very young age. I was full of rage whenever I was facing any type of opposition. So there were problems from the start. I started getting arrested probably around that age also, 11, 12 years old. Again, the issue began with the school, my having problems there. I didn't want to go to school, and I started leaving school, and a multitude of things began happening as a result of that. But shortly after those problems began and the arrests began, I found myself being detained and incarcerated. So the first level of incarceration for me, what I call incarceration, was actually what's referred to as shelters. Shelters are basically for runaways or homeless kids, and these were the first type places that I found myself in. And basically, it was a result of my having problems at home with family and my not being willing to stay there and continue to face those problems there. And so I would leave, or I would be thrown out, and I'd sleep wherever I could. I'd sleep in the streets. There was a bridge that I knew of that was through some woods, and sometimes I'd go through there and I'd sleep there at night. I'd sleep in parks, wherever I could. But the police, whenever I encountered them around that time, they'd arrest me and detain me, and I'd end up in these shelters. So those were the first tight places that I was exposed to. They weren't that bad, though they were basic detention. I was not there by my own free will. It really wasn't very violent at that stage yet. The next stage after that was juvenile detention centers. And I evolved to that stage. I think the first time was because of a fight that I had been involved in the school. It was some older guy that I had some problems with. And, he was a lot bigger than me. He had a lot of friends. I didn't, so I knew how the thing was going to happen. There was a big crowd of people there ready to watch the fight. And as the fight began, I pulled out a weapon, and somebody apparently got wind of it prior, and the police came, and the police just came at the moment that things were about to happen. And so I gave the weapon to somebody, and they ended up turning it in later on, and I ended up getting arrested for that. So it was a minor charge, but it did land me in juvenile detention. So that was probably one of the first times there, and I must have been around 13 years old around that time. There were multiple times that I was in and out of juvenile detention facilities. So in those places, I was exposed to a lot of really fucked up things, basically. The first of which is the obvious. Putting people in a cage, especially at a young age, children, in my opinion, is wrong. Nothing good comes of it. Humans are not meant to be caged. We're not meant to be solitary animals. We're not meant to be confined. And so there were a lot of psychological effects that happened to me and many others as a result of being in places like those at those early ages. In addition to that, juvenile detention was a place where I basically first lost my mind. And I say lost my mind in the sense of became extremely, extremely violent because of what was happening with the guards in particular. I had a problem with a lot of the guards there, and they would talk shit to me, I would talk shit to them, and that evolved into beatings. And basically, certain cops and certain shifts would just come in and go right for my cell, and they would just beat the fuck out of me. And them beating me in that way basically enraged me so much to the point that I just lost it. And I realized that the only power they had over me was the fear that they wanted me to feel of them, and the fear of the beatings. And so rather than be afraid and show them any weakness, I just became psychotic. And so the certain cops that I had those problems with, when they came on, I would just bang the door and scream at them and curse them out and talk shit about them and welcome them to come get me. And as they were beating me, I would still talk shit to them and tell them that they hit like girls and that they weren't hurting me, and it just unbelievable. And it would go on, and they would just beat me until they got tired. And I would never cry, I would never scream, and I just basically removed the whole purpose of it for them. And so that went on for some time. In addition to that, the way the place was situated, there were basically solitary cells, and of which had no bathrooms in them. So there was one bathroom per floor, and if you had to use the bathroom at night, you have to basically get the attention of one of the guards, and he has to come down, open your cell, and allow you to walk down the hallway and go to the bathroom. And the problem with that was that I tend to go to the bathroom often during the night, as I still do, and because of that, the guards, really were upset with me. They didn't want to do it for me. They didn't want to open the door, and it got to the point where they just stopped allowing me to use the bathroom. And so being locked in your room, for 20 hours a day or whatever it was at different times, the overnight period in itself, it's sad for me to even say, but what ended up happening was I'd have to go to the bathroom in the cell. And if I had to pee, I would just go pee in the corner of the room. And when the doors open in the morning, I'd go out and I'd get a mop, and I'd have to come clean it and mop it every day. And that was my reality. Just one of the things that I had to deal with in that type of environment. So that time of my life was very important in the story as far as the downfall, what I like to think of as the downfall. The time of my life where I really started going downward and my mind just became poisoned. As you could imagine, just the result of the beatings and stuff and the fighting all the time and the being alone and isolation. Another thing that happened to me was because of the problems I had with the guards, they decided to take me away from everybody else and put me on a floor that used to be for females that was no longer in use, where I was the only person on that floor all by myself. And so they literally just leave me there, and there'd be no sign of life. I couldn't hear another voice. I screamed out. There was nobody there. There was no guard, no nothing. And they'd just leave me there for days and days and days as punishment. And, they'd come down and give me food and whatever. But it was just another way that they tried to break me mentally, because they weren't happy with the fact that I wasn't kissing their asses and begging them to stop and for help. That wasn't going to happen. So the first couple times I was there for short periods. It wasn't very long. But then I ended up getting arrested for cocaine, possession of cocaine with intent to distribute. And the short of that story is that I was involved with some older guys. These guys were in their 40s and 50s. I was a very young kid. And we were selling some weed together initially. They were doing some coke and crack and selling it, not using it. And so they tried to get me to do that for them. And so very shortly after I agreed to do that, we started making some runs into New York and getting the stuff, and they were showing me how I needed to sell it. Very shortly after, somebody must have set me up or said something. I don't know what it was, but I was on probation at the time, and probation ended up coming to my house, and I just got arrested for it. So I got arrested for it and charged with the possession. I had some cash, I had some weapons, and I got charged. So that was my first serious charge as a juvenile. At the time that I went in front of the judge, obviously the judges knew me. They didn't like me. They knew that I was causing a lot of problems. And I'm not going to go over all the little arrests because there were many of them. But I was just a little badass. I didn't give a fuck at that point. I had no fear, and I felt like I had been abused and just molded into something that couldn't fit into society in any way. And so it was only a matter of time before I had to do some serious prison time. And so as a result of that drug charge, I ended up spending, I don't know exactly, I think it was about 6 months first um, in juvenile detention in the same place that I mentioned, enduring all that bullshit that was happening there. But some other interesting thing that happened during that time was that that was the first time that I had been exposed to religion and to God. And when I say exposed to, it wasn't that someone came and spoke to me about it. It was that all I had to read was a Bible at times, and there was nothing else. So it was just me in the room with the Bible, and I'd sit up at night under a small window that was in the cell, and try to get street light so I can read the Bible at night. And that influenced me a lot. You know, that was the first time. There were many times in my life where I became religious and spiritual and tried to change and try to make a new way for myself. Many times were only for short periods, and I failed as a result of just being overwhelmed by life and by circumstance. But that was one of the first times that that happened to me. So after that 6 months or so there, I basically had the option to serve a prison term as a juvenile or accept a drug program. So the drug program, even though I wasn't a drug user, I never had been an abuser of drugs, I decided that it was better for me to tell them that I was using the drugs and have a problem and take this program rather than prison. That turned out to be a mistake for me, and I would never do it again because the programs are just not for me. I didn't fit in there from the start. Everybody just tells on each other, and it's some fucking bitch type environment that I'm not accustomed to. So I had some problems there anyway. But I went to that place and I was supposed to be there for a year. So after being there for, I don't know how long, maybe 5, 6 months, I had some issues there. I had gotten in a fight with one of the people they call a shot caller. Basically, it's an inmate that the staff gives some power to, and he thinks he's a fucking cop and he wants to tell other people what to do. So it turned out that one of the kids there, who was now a shot caller, who I got in a fight with, was a kid that I knew from juvenile detention from before, and he was a white kid that was getting fucked with in there, who I helped. Basically, I defended and I stuck up for. So who the fuck is he to now be telling me what to do in this other place where I'm the one who fucking protected him? He couldn't even live where the fuck we were without help. And so I took offense to that, and we fought, and he lost, and he went and told on me, and so I knew that I was going to be removed as a result of that place. In places like that, it's not like jails where you commit infractions, you get a charge, you go to a hole, and you come out. In there, especially if you fight anyone, commit violence, they remove you because it's supposed to be a privilege to be in these drug programs rather than jail. And so I knew I was going to be removed immediately. Basically, state police would show up very early in the morning, 4 or 5 a.m., and just surprise you and take you. And so rather than let that happen, me with a friend of mine, and in these stories there are a lot of people I'm just going to call my friends because I'm not going to reveal names and certain details. But this friend of mine there was really, really close with me. He was in there also with me. He had been in state prison prior, and he was older. I think he was about 17 or 18 at the time. There were some adults in there also. The program also did have a lot of adults, actually, but they were in a separate part, and we mixed on occasion. So he and I decided to escape this place. Rather than just wait for the police to come get me and take me, we escaped. And so the night that I knew, the night that the incident happened, and I knew that they were going to be coming the following morning, we escaped. And basically, we escaped onto the streets of Patterson, and we ended up in a mountain, sleeping there for like 10 days straight. We got chased into there by bounty hunters. We barely escaped them. We climbed into an alley. They chased us into an alley, and we shimmied in between two buildings in the alleyway and somehow climbed up to the roof and just laid there for hours as they were just circling with their flashlights. And we heard them wondering where the fuck we were. And we just sat there the first night, and then we ended up in this mountain, and we hid out there for a long time. To make the story short, he and I made a deal that we were going to meet up again. We were going to part ways. I advised him not to go to his family and friend's house. I think it was his girlfriend at the time he was crazy about. And he he agreed that he'd not, and rather than do that, he went and he got caught. He got arrested. They were waiting for him there, so I never saw him again after that. He was a really good friend of mine at the time. And so now I was on the run by myself, and I stayed on the run for a couple weeks. I stayed at one of my cousin's house for a while, a couple different places, and basically I came to the realization that there was nothing for me to do as a fugitive. I had no money, I had no resources, I had no home, I had no means to survive, and so either I was going to be a junkie in the streets and homeless, or I would have to face whatever I was facing and just get it over with and have hope for a chance at life again. And so with that, I made the decision to turn myself in. And I walked into a courthouse where I knew everybody would know me, and I told them what the situation was, and they arrested me and sent me back to juvenile detention. I ended up staying there for a couple months more. It was a short time where I finally was able to see a judge and plead my case to him, and the judge, upon review, for whatever reason, decided that I had served enough time and gone through enough, and he was going to release me shortly after. And so that was my first period of incarceration, serious incarceration, and it affected me a lot. After that, I came out. I was like, 16 years old, and I didn't fit in anywhere. There was nothing for me to do in school or socially. I was a whole different animal than the rest, and I literally was an animal. I was like a little monster back then because I'd just been exposed to so much bad, so much dark and so much violence, and so much anger and hatred that I was just lost in life, and that's the real truth about that time. And so I made efforts, mainly for my mother's sake, to go back to school, and it never worked out. Speaking of school, I was in a bunch, probably 5 or 6 different schools, and I was thrown out of every one. And so some of the reasons I was thrown out were for fighting. Others were for one time I was falsely accused of selling drugs in the school. It wasn't true. Some kids got caught with some coke, and they said it was mine. Another time, I was in a technical school, and I was only there for about a week or so, and there was a payphone. I was waiting to use the payphone. Some kid was talking on it. Older guy. He was 18 years old, and he wouldn't. He didn't give me. He didn't even acknowledge me that I was waiting. The class was about to start, and so I tapped him politely again and asked him. And he had a drink in his hand. He took the drink and took a sip and just spit it on me. And I couldn't believe it. I was just shocked, and I just exploded on this kid, and I beat the fuck out of this guy so bad and just left him there and continued on. And I went to my class, and a couple minutes later, I see the principal, the superintendent, and police walk into the class, and sure enough, they removed me. And that was one of those instances where I didn't understand why I was wrong. I didn't understand what I was supposed to do. And that pattern would continue on in my life where I was in opposition with what society felt was right and could make sense of. To me, it was perfectly logical. The guy fucking spit on me. What the fuck am I supposed to do? I beat the fuck out of him. He paid the price, and it's over. We move on. But in their world, it's a big deal, and you could get expelled, and they have to press charges on you. And it's just such bullshit. But nevertheless, there are many, many, many stories that I'm obviously not going to repeat all of because it would take forever. But going back to where I was in the previous, I ended up out, and I was just really fucked up in my head at that time. And I remember just not even leaving my room. I would just stay in my bedroom and not leave for a long time, and look out the window and just observe and not really have any feeling of wanting to interact with anyone. And I was just I was really, really fucked up in the head. And so I left school completely, and I ended up going to Manhattan, to the Diamond District, and finding a job there in manufacturing, which is something I wanted to do. I realized I had to work. And so that was something I was interested in, and I was able to manipulate a job there. And that job led to learning different skills, and I ended up with a trade as a diamond setter. The diamond setter led to me being a diamond dealer, and so I had some way to make money from an early age. I started making money and living on my own completely, probably at 17, right, very early. And so that was a good thing, you know. And at that time, I rented a house, and I was alone, and I would basically work from my house. I had worked for many years prior, learning and developing the skill, but you know, after a time, I was able to work at home and do diamond setting at home in addition to whatever I had to do outside. So I was just completely isolated. I stayed to myself. I very rarely interact. I'd have a couple girlfriends here and there. They do, you know, my shopping for me, my dry cleaning, and things like that. But I was surviving. You know, I wasn't in trouble. I wasn't really bothering anybody, and I started having problems with the police in that town. Um, I don't remember the first time the interaction happened. Actually, I do remember. I was sitting outside on my front step one night, and I was just having a beer by myself in between work, and the cops came. And so when they came, they called backup, and they stopped right in front of the house. And all these cops get out and come at me aggressively, and I'm like, what the fuck? What do you want? I'm not doing anything. I'm sitting on my step. And they told me that I'm drinking in public and started asking me for my ID and all this and that. And we had some words, and I cursed them out. And that was the first encounter I had with those cops, but it led to a lot of others. Um, Similarly, in many instances, when I moved to certain places, once the local police become aware of me and we, you know, come face to face to each other, I end up having a problem with them because they're not happy with how I speak with them, and they're not accustomed to people dealing with those encounters the way I do with them. I don't give a fuck who the fuck they are, cop or not. To me, a cop was just another gang member with a fucking gay ass uniform. They happen to like blue in this stupid uniform, and others like others, and that's all it was to me. So my mindset back then for a long time was that if I'm not bothering you, you have no right to bother me. And the moment you fuck with me, again, cop or not, you're my enemy. And so that was a very dangerous mindset to have because it led to a lot of problems. But I'm going to end that with the first chapter, and I'll go into the next one shortly.